All right, I have a great show for you today. I have with me Colonel Tony Shaffer. We're going to be talking about many different topics: war propaganda coming out of Russia and Ukraine, the threat of China to the United States and the globe, and many, many other topics. Colonel Shaffer, thank you so much for being on today's show.
Stephen, always great to join you. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so there's a lot of buzz right now and worry about Russia blowing up this nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia,
Yeah.
an area that they've had full military control of for many, many months. This fear was stoked by President Volodymyr Zelensky announcing that Ukrainian intel had information on Russia lining the roof of the nuclear power plant with explosions. What is your take on this? Is this war propaganda, especially with the announcement of Zelensky ending by saying, and Ukraine is not involved in this. This has nothing to do with Ukraine.
Oh,
What is the information that you're getting? Because if this happens, this is like a huge story, but it kind of screams war propaganda to me.
it's pure propaganda. Your instincts are completely correct. The place I recommend your audience start to understand what's going on is just go check out the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is not known to be pro-Russian. They inspected the plant. They are the ones who go and for the United Nations and do an independent verification and inspection of nuclear power plants. You guys can check out their history. They did a lot of stuff with the North Koreans on the Yongbyon nuclear facility there. So I don't always trust their observations because I think sometimes they downplay risk. In this case, I don't think there was any incentive to downplay risk. That is to say that there is a path to a nuclear weapon. That's our issue with them normally. They look at Iran, they look at North Korea, and typically they're very gentle on the state that they're inspecting regarding, do you think they can produce a nuclear weapon? Well, that's not present in this equation. It has nothing to do with that. Russians have plenty of nukes. No danger there. They're going to do something with the Zaporizhzhia on this. So their report in this case, I think, is very accurate, and they basically conclude there's no evidence they're going to do anything. The Russians are going to do anything to undermine this plant. To your point, they've had control of it for a long time. They've cut the staff. Okay, that's their decision. Whatever. It doesn't make it less safe. It just means that they're taking and doing things that they believe will be economically beneficial to the economics of the plant. That's it. They've not compromised, according to the IAEA, any safety mechanisms or produced or put in place any explosives which would destroy the plant. There's no interest for it. What they have done, the Russians have established, like they did in Bakhmut and other places they've controlled, layered defenses around the plant. That is to say, if there's a military incursion on the plant by the Ukrainians, they're going to run into the same layered defenses they're running into everywhere else on the battlefield. The Russians have been extraordinarily gifted. Again, let me clarify for the record, because I always got to do this. I'm not pro-Putin. I'm not pro-Russian. I'm simply calling balls and strikes. And in this case, the strikes have been on the Ukrainians because the Russians have been masters in providing preparing layered, effective defenses on the battlefield. So that's what they've done at the nuclear plant. They've created layered defenses. And I think, to your point, Stephen, Zelensky seems to be wanting to prompt this idea that something bad's about to happen, maybe because they want something to happen. This is almost projection rather than reporting. And I no intelligence source I know of that Zelensky's referencing intelligence sources. No intelligence sources from our side is saying any such thing about the Russians at this point. So that, to me, indicates it's pure, and this is the purest propaganda I think you're going to see in the current war.
Okay. I mean, for me, the first thing was, why would Russia expend so much effort, money, energy, military equipment, military bodies, ammunitions, weapons to control the nuclear power plant only to turn around and blow it up themselves. It's kind of like, why would Putin spend $11 billion to finish a pipeline to Germany and then blow it up himself? That story never made any sense to me, and that's kind of how I see this nuclear power plant.
And I do too. And this is where we have to be concerned, because anytime you use the word nuclear, and I think Zelensky knows that, because, you know, the other thing that happened that we're all, I think people in the background remember is the Chernobyl event, the meltdown of that plant. And I'm going somewhere with this. The Chernobyl plant was designed differently than the Zaporizhzhia plant, big time difference. A lot of safety features were not incorporated into the Russian Soviet thinking back in the days when Chernobyl was created. Zaporizhzhia is completely different. Again, I think the IAEA would even state that this is a very safe plant. With that said, the destruction recently of the Kharkov Dam it does create conditions of danger for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The water, the coolant water. And for those of your audience, I got a degree in environmental studies. Well, believe it or not, one of my final exam for one of the quarters for environmental studies, I don't remember which class it was, I had to draw from memory. You had 2 hours to draw from memory a nuclear power plant, and you had to describe each feature. And so that was, yeah. So it was a fun exam, just saying. And so a nuclear power plant needs water to successfully operate. It's basically nothing more than 18th century technology, the same things that you saw on steam locomotives back, you know, in the early days of railroads, simply expanded, modified, and modernized with energy. The energy to drive the steam turbine comes from nuclear energy, from, you know, basically the boiling of water. So that boiling of water requires a steady stream, because it's also coolant. When you put this into the core through the pipes, it cools it. It cools the core. So it's a very, very safe process. Very, very efficient process. This is one of the most efficient ways of creating energy, Stephen. I'm a big nuclear energy guy. We need to do more of it. We could probably talk about that another day. But I'm just saying, this is something it's not a difficult technology to understand. But the moment you shut off that coolant water, the moment you endanger it, and you can potentially create Chernobyl conditions where the core could melt. And that's where we're at right now, because the fact is that you have the Kharkov Dam gone. The water supply that was being supplied to the nuclear power plant is now depleted to the point of where it may be in danger. So Zelensky is counting on this, which again reinforces in my mind why I believe Ukraine destroyed the dam. Again, because that was Russian control true. Why would the Russians control something and destroy it themselves? It doesn't make sense to me. And I think this is more indicator that this is part of a larger plan the Ukrainians are executing to create these conditions for nuclear fears on the battlefield.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'm hearing and reading that the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Prigozhin, may have been misled by the United States CIA and British MI6, that if he went after Putin, that if he and his men marched on Moscow, that they would be given assistance to take out Putin. Do you have any background or insight on this claim?
No, only observations. There's things that I've seen which indicate there's evidence of what you just said. So let me just start out with the most basic. Right before the attempted coup, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, by Prigozhin, there were comments by Prigozhin himself and pro-Western, you know, basically picking up and echoing some truthfully the issues relating to the Ukrainian narrative and Western narrative. For example, the number of troops killed in the process of taking certain cities. Yeah, I'm sure Wagner suffered greatly. The fundamental Prigozhin saying that it was all a lie, why the Russians did what they did. Well, I've said this from day one. It's all about resources. Yes, they're justifying all the patriotic stuff. And yes, there's people there being kind of troubled by the Ukrainians, no doubt, but it's all about resources. So it was a lie. Okay. So what's extraordinary, Stephen, is he's saying this. I mean, he's one of Putin's guys. So I've said this before, and I don't know, and I don't mean to be redundant, but people need to understand and stop projecting our standards on the Russians and on the Ukrainians. The way they see the world, the way they operate, is not like us. And so I've said several times, if you can picture an episode of The Sopranos and you merge that with The Hunt for Red October, that's what you're seeing here. You have thugs who have come up with Putin, have their own interests. You know, would the mafia double deal? Of course. Who hasn't watched The Godfather and understands kind of the basic understand how it works? Same thing here. You're talking about people who have huge egos, made a lot of money, and they think that they're smarter than they're the smartest guy in the room. So I every time I hear these folks on the left, oh, you know, these people are all being sensible, and you got to actually look at how they're doing things like we would do it. It's like, no, stop the nonsense. So I do believe that in the process of Prigozhin kind of doing his mafioso thing, he did approach the West. And I do believe that he was telegraphing kind of his interest in doing something against Putin by these public statements, which he got away with. Putin made the mistake of letting him get away with this nonsense, because I think there was a certain bond by the fact they came up together, you know, being these oligarchs, you know, being these strongmen from St. Petersburg. And I think that little soft spot in Putin's heart, for what it's worth, allowed Prigozhin to get way down the road on this. And I think at some point, through some mechanism that we don't know yet, but I'm sure we're going to find out, he reached out to CIA or MI6. But there's no doubt that hold on a second. Sorry. There's no doubt that he did something to approach the West. Now, the second piece of evidence is right before he did this, there was a briefing to the Gang of Eight. Stephen, your audience, and you probably know, there's certain folks in Congress, both houses, Senate and House, that and then leadership, Senate and House leadership, who are read into pretty much everything. Some of the operations I ran, some of the most compartmented operations were only briefed to those folks. As a matter of fact, one operation was only briefed to 4 folks that I ran. So, but these are the folks who have the most access to not only intelligence information, but operational intelligence. I'm an operator, so people have to distinguish analysts and managers from operators. I'm the guy that goes down range. I'm the guy, you know, like you read Darkheart, I'm the guy in the helicopter with the Rangers going out to do things. So, yeah. I do believe that these folks were briefed on an operational issue relating to Prigozhin right before the coup, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, and there was radio silence. Nobody wanted to do anything, but they were the White House was obligated to brief them on a significant issue. This met that criteria. And typically they only do it when they want to spread the blame around when something's about to go wrong. So I think this is my forecast for your audience. I think we're going to come to find that Prigozhin went to Bill Burns and said, hey, are you with me? Let's take out Putin. And this is the day I'm going to do it on. And I think there was a waffling on the West. I think the West didn't know what to do. There's issues if you involve yourself in an internal coup. You know, you break it, you own it, to quote Colin Powell. You break the Russian government, Stephen, you've got the largest nuclear arsenal in the world up for grabs by all of these oligarchs. And I'm telling you right now, we've run scenarios. The central government of Russia falls, those nukes go loose, at least 1 to 2% of those. And let me tell you, 1 to 2% of what they have could create a very bad day for the rest of the world. It's not a good idea. So I think people recognize that. I'd like to believe they did, because we've created scenarios on this of what would happen. If you involve yourself, something goes wrong, the whole thing turns into Syria or worse, Libya. It's just things you don't want to do. Anyway, so I think there's evidence that they were briefed. And then the other thing that to me indicates something is the moment Lavrov, after the fact, announced they were investigating to see if NATO or Western involvement was present in the Prigozhin thing. Biden, within I think a couple of hours, was on the air saying, "Oh, wasn't us. We had nothing to do with this." To me, that was like "Thou dost protest too much," to quote to badly quote Shakespeare. So I think we're going to come to find there was involvement.
Okay, well, we'll wait and watch for that.
Yeah.
Coming back to the United States, we've talked about this. There's an open border on our southern border. Democrats are now waking up to that. Republicans have known it for a while.
Yeah.
However, this current administration seems to be blind to it, or willfully blind to it. Do you think the next president of the United States will put U.S. military boots on the ground at the border? Because I've seen interviews with Robert Kennedy Jr. where he insinuates that. And I've seen interviews where Trump just openly admits point blank, we're going to secure the border. And part of that will be having the military back at home, protecting the border. Where do you see that situation heading?
So I don't want to be redundant if I already said this on your show. We actually worked this issue back in the 90s. In about 90, 94, 95. I was the senior clandestine advisor to the senior intelligence officer to the to JATF, Joint Interagency Task Force East and Key West. It was the command, joint and interagency command. I mean, it was run by the Coasties. I love the Coasties. Shout out to the Coast Guard, with a Navy and Army hybrid staff working intelligence issues, Navy primarily doing SIGINT, Army doing the clandestine human stuff. That's why I was there. Spies, military spies, military case officers. A great operation, by the way. I was very, very focused on the mission, the transit zone, the zone of transit between Colombia, essentially, Venezuela, and Mexico, where the drugs are coming through. And we assessed then, 25 years ago, Stephen, wow, that this was going to become an issue, that the constant influx of drugs and money into Mexico was going to destabilize it. So we wanted to do what we call intelligence preparation of the battle space, basically look at Mexico as if it was an adversarial country and prepare it for battle. So the answer is it should be done, because we saw the issue 20 years ago. In my other book, The Last Line, is based on the very thing we're talking about. It's like, how do we do this? So you could do this rapidly and with little expense by having a handful of military folks involved who actually did this in Iraq and Afghanistan regarding understanding and prepping what we call centers of gravity, understanding where those things are happening. And I don't think you could do it through the use of people like me and special operations to look across the border, across the horizon into Mexico to figure out who the bad guys are. And then you, on the border itself, you use National Guard. You use Title 34, not Title 10. There's a reason I would do it that way. Title 34 allows the National Guard to deploy their forces kind of as state organizations and then work as law enforcement. Military, because of posse comitatus, cannot do law enforcement. I can't do law enforcement if I'm in federal status, rightfully so. You don't want the U.S. Army functioning as a law enforcement organization. It's a bad idea. Anyway, but you can use the state guard, National Guards, in a way that they kind of cross across the border, and they can do law enforcement functions to augment DHS. So the answer is, yeah, they should do that. They can do it. They have the authorities already in place. You don't need new authorities. You just need to have creative people who understand the law and how to make things happen come together. And then for the federal sources like me, the federal, you put them across the border to go do a federal job to go after the bad guys. And for those of you who follow this closely, Mark Bowden did a great book called Killing Pablo. I don't want to say if everything in that book is accurate, but I think it probably is. Just saying. And you may want to read that because it shows what we can do special operations wise outside of the border to do it. So yeah, we have the resources, we have the authorities. All we need is the political will and leadership to allow us to do it. And we would probably shut down the cartels within 6 months with a complete control of the border, with return to civility and helping those communities on the border bail themselves out within a year. It can be done. And there's no doubt in my military mind it can be done. And it's a matter of political will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was last month, RFK Jr. went to the border and he said, why are there so many open sections of the southern border? Yet with my own eyes, I can see billions of dollars of materials that have been ordered to be left alone. They don't want those holes in the wall to be repaired.
Right.
So that's why I say willfully blind to this issue. You now have somebody challenging Biden from his own party saying, I've seen it with my own eyes that you guys are allowing people to flood into the country, and you're allowing tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of steel and other materials to sit and rust while the country is infiltrated on the southern border.
And I was listening to NPR because I have to once in a while just to find out what they're saying. By the way, on a personal note, NPR, how did they get away with being completely left? They always say that we're the national public radio. It's like, I've never heard a conservative voice one on there, ever. Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. But I was listening to it, and even a gay Democrat councilman from one of the border towns said exactly what you just said. We can't do this anymore. As much as the Biden administration would like to believe that we can, have people come here and all be accepted, we are a small community. We cannot maintain the pace of trying to process and house all these people. It's not possible. And he was openly gay, as progressive as you could probably be. And I don't care if you're gay. Who cares if you're gay? I don't care. I'm not saying that as a statement of policy. I'm just saying it was very clear he's not a conservative, and his views were not conservative. But he was saying flat out that the current policy is harming the progressive movement across the board, especially in smaller communities. So it's going to have to take people like RFK Jr. and people like him to say enough's enough, because we've been saying it, rightfully so, factually supported for a long time. And I think it's just something that's going to have to be an issue that everybody comes together on.
Yeah. Switching countries, we're finding out that China has spy bases in Cuba.
Yes.
And they've also infiltrated the United States with a secret police force that is nationwide. Why are we allowing such easy access to our country? And why does it appear there's no urgency or concern to stop China from infiltrating the United States?
Because that's the policy. The policy is to permit China to do what it's doing. On my own radio show, I interviewed Congressman Eli Crane from Arizona 2nd District, former Navy SEAL, good guy. And he has been talking and interrogating Department of Justice and FBI folks on this very issue. And it's very clear. I recommend people, don't take my word, go check for yourself. You can Google his name, Congressman Crane. He did a lot of interviews on Forbes, which is a reputable site, and he actually grills the FBI on this very issue. And the FBI basically pretends they don't understand what's going on. He literally lays out how the Chinese, the PRC, have said as a national policy that they will do what they can to undermine our influence around the world, to include undermining our political system. And so when you have people in the administration, the FBI is supposed to be the primary law enforcement or agency which actually stops and prevents espionage or the undermining of American interests, and they're not willing to do it, then what do you expect? There was a specific questioning he did of an FBI senior executive of something called elite capture. And I used to do this as a living too. This is part of my counterintelligence days. So elite capture, Stephen, is when a nation state engages in espionage operations to compromise the political leadership of that country. Chinese are doing this. Basically, you buy politicians. That's what you do. I used to bribe people for a living too. Sometimes you give them the option. You can do it the easy way or the hard way, but you're going to do it. And in this case, elite capture is essentially a series of operations that the Chinese have engaged in from going from the political leadership down to the scientific leadership, trying to figure out ways to suborn our system or obtain information. So the FBI pretended when Eli Crane questioned the FBI executive, the executive had no idea about elite capture. What? I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? So if you have the FBI ignoring the fact that people like Joe Biden and Hunter Biden have been enriched by China, and the policies which you see them invoking or establishing are benefiting China, and then you see these other things like Chinese police departments showing up across the board. You see the Lourdes Signals Intelligence Station just outside of Havana, which was created by the Soviets, abandoned when they became the Russians, reopened and expanded by the Chinese, and nobody seems to be batting an eye. It's because it's policy, because the Chinese have infiltrated our system to the point of where the very mechanisms that should be identifying the threat that they are and the actions they're taking to undermine our ability to defend our equities, our people, and our economic system, then it's basically because you have a system that is politically compromised. And I think there's an old saying, Stephen, Japanese, I think it's Japanese, that the fish rots from the head. We have a very rotten head. And I think it's rotting, and it's because the Chinese have basically put poison into that head, and it's not functioning.